The Golden Lantern was the kind of place where silence cost more than a week's wages, where the air itself seemed perfumed with old money and old secrets. Cut crystal glasses caught the chandelier's glow, casting diamonds of light across linen-draped tables. Waiters moved like shadows, silent and precise, as if a single misstep could crack the illusion of perfection. Among them moved Emily Carter, 24, with tired eyes that hinted at years of struggle. She carried herself with the careful grace of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. Her black uniform was crisp, but worn at the seams. Around her neck, tucked just beneath the collar, hung a silver pendant shaped like a compass rose. It glinted now and then as she bent to place a glass, a secret reminder of a past she had never been able to touch. To the guests she served, Emily was nothing more than a pair of steady hands. Tonight, those hands carried a bottle of Bordeaux so expensive that its price could have cleared her rent for months. She poured the first glass with practiced calm, her wrist steady, despite the weight of eyes that looked through her rather than at her. But then it happened. A careless wave of a jeweled hand. A sudden bump from a guest lost in his story. The bottle tipped. The scarlet wine cascaded across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing onto the silk blouse of Margaret Delacroix, the grande dame of the room. The gasp that followed was louder than the clink of breaking glass. Chairs shifted. Forks paused mid-air. Margaret shot to her feet, her voice slicing through the hush like a blade. "You clumsy girl. Do you have any idea what you've done? This blouse is couture." Emily stammered an apology, her heart hammering against her ribs. But Margaret wasn't finished. Her hand flew to her neck, then to her fingers. Her eyes widened with theatrical horror. "My ring," she cried. "My diamond ring, it's gone." The accusation landed like a stone thrown into still water. The ripples spread quickly. Whispers hissed through the room. Margaret's trembling finger rose, pointing squarely at Emily. "You were close to me. You must have taken it." Emily's protest cracked in her throat. She had touched nothing, stolen nothing. Yet the truth was weightless in the face of Margaret's fury. The restaurant's manager, a small man with a backbone of paper, rushed to the table. He didn't ask questions. He didn't defend his waitress. He bowed to wealth. "Emily," he said, voice tight, "empty your pockets." She obeyed her shaking hands, laying bare a notepad, a pen, a few wrinkled bills, a tube of lip balm. Nothing more. But the absence of guilt wasn't enough. Margaret sneered, demanding the police. The manager blanched, and in that moment, the choice was made. "You're finished here," he hissed. "Gather your things. You're fired." The word struck like a lash. Fired. Humiliated. Accused of theft before strangers who would forget her name by dessert. Emily felt heat rise to her face, but she refused to let them see her break. She walked through the dining room, with her chin lifted, her dignity the last possession she could still claim. Out in the alley, the city's cold night air closed around her. She pulled her thin coat tight, her breath fogging in the lamplight. Her hand found the pendant at her throat, the compass rose worn smooth by years of touch. It was all she had. The only fragment of a story she had never been told. She didn't know that from a shadowed booth in the corner of the Golden Lantern, a pair of eyes had followed every moment. Eyes that would change her life forever. Richard Hale sat alone in a high-backed booth at the farthest edge of the Golden Lantern. The shadows embraced him, as they always did on this night. He nursed a glass of scotch, not for the taste, but for the weight it carried, the ritual of remembering. For Richard, this date was not just another square on the calendar. It was the scar carved deepest in his life. Decades ago, a storm had risen out of nowhere off the coast of Maine. Black waves rising like mountains, tearing apart the small yacht his parents adored. He was 10 years old. He remembered clinging to the splintered deck, his lungs raw with salt water, his arms reaching desperately for the small hand that had slipped through his fingers. His sister Anna, 6 years old, had been there one moment and gone the next. Her body was never found. Every year since Richard came back to this building, once a modest family bistro, now transformed into an opulent restaurant, to sit in silence and let the ghosts visit. The empire he had built since then, the skyscrapers that bore his name, the ruthless reputation that could break rivals with a single phone call. None of it silenced the grief that gnawed at the edges of his soul. Success had become his armor, but armor cannot heal the wound it protects. Tonight, as the usual parade of the wealthy unfolded around him, Richard paid no mind to the quarrel at table 7. He had seen too many scenes like it, a pampered woman with a voice sharpened by entitlement, a young waitress trapped in the crossfire, a weak manager bowing to money. It was the kind of play that repeated endlessly in high society. He thought nothing of it, but then she walked past, the waitress, Emily Carter. Her eyes wet with unshed tears, her shoulders stiff with the weight of humiliation. She clutched her bag to her chest, as though it carried the last remnants of her dignity. She moved quickly, wanting only to escape the glares. And then, a collision. A busboy laden with dishes stepped too close. Emily's bag slipped. The contents scattered across the floor. A battered paperback, a tube of lip balm, a ring of keys, and then swinging loose for the briefest of moments, the pendant. The silver compass swung in the lamplight, catching a glow as if the world itself wanted Richard to see it. He froze. Every breath left his lungs. His vision tunneled to that small, shining piece of metal. He knew it. God help him, he knew it. He had memorized every line of its engraving, traced it with his child's fingers when it hung around Anna's neck. The compass rose with its slightly rounded points. The tiny sapphire chip set at true north. And on the back, though he could not yet see it, he knew the words were there, ad astra per aspera, to the stars through hardship. Alongside 2 initials, LH and AH, Lucius Hale, Anna Hale. Their father had commissioned them as a pair his son's signet ring, his daughter's pendant. One lost to the sea, the other, impossibly unexplainably, glimmering now in the hands of a waitress. The world around him blurred. The restaurant and the music, the conversations all dissolved into meaningless noise. All Richard could see was that compass. All he could feel was the phantom chill of the Atlantic swallowing his family whole. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and steel, became chaos. Could it be? Was this waitress the one dismissed as nothing more than a servant in black uniform? Was she Anna? Was she the child he had mourned for 22 years? Richard's hand trembled against the table. The scotch in his glass sloshed untouched. For the first time in decades, his armor cracked and something long buried surged through him. It was grief colliding with impossible hope, disbelief wrestling with desperate faith. Emily gathered her things quickly, tucking the pendant back beneath her shirt. She never looked his way. She simply turned, shoulders slumped, and pushed through the doors into the night. Richard Hale remained frozen in the shadows, his heart hammering in his chest like it hadn't since he was a boy. A ghost had just walked past him. A ghost wearing his sister's pendant. Emily vanished into the night as if the city had swallowed her whole. By the time Richard Hale pushed out of the restaurant's heavy doors, she was already gone, just a shadow at the end of the block, swallowed by the turn of a corner. For a long moment he stood in the cold, staring into the dark. The pendant was all he could see in his mind's eye, burning like a brand into his memory. His rational mind told him it was impossible. His heart told him the opposite. He turned back inside, every step vibrating with a new, dangerous resolve. The manager, thin and sweating, still hovered near Margaret Delacroix's table, bowing and scraping like a man begging for crumbs. Richard's approach was silent, but his presence landed like a thunderclap. Henderson's face drained of color. "Her file," Richard said flatly. "Mr. Hale, I'm afraid we can't." "You can, and you will." His voice was low, steady, but edged with steel. "Her full record, address, phone number, every detail." The manager stammered about confidentiality, about company policy, about rules that had no weight in the gravity of Richard Hale's stare. Within minutes, he had what he wanted, a thin manila folder, barely thicker than a single page. A handful of details: an address in a rundown neighborhood, a prepaid phone number, no next of kin. The file of someone who existed only on the margins, someone the world had already chosen to forget. But even scraps were enough for Richard to act. That night, his network came alive. His security chief, his private investigators, analysts, who could pull threads from the smallest trace, he unleashed them all. For most people, there was no hiding from Richard Hale. Not in a world of credit card trails, phone records, and endless data points. And yet Emily Carter was smoke. She paid in cash. She carried no credit cards. Her phone was a cheap burner that went dark the same night she was fired. No social media, no driver's license, no online footprint. Nothing but a name on a payroll and a compass pendant burned into his memory. Days dragged into nights. In the penthouse, Richard paced like a caged predator, glass walls reflecting his silhouette against the storm of the city. Papers cluttered his desk, contracts, unsigned deals suspended. His empire, usually an extension of his will, stumbled without his hand on the reins. Whispers filled the corridors of Hale Enterprises. Assistants spoke in hushed tones of their boss's fury, of the way his gaze had turned cold and feral, as if some private war consumed him. He had always been relentless. Now he was desperate, and desperation made him dangerous. By the fourth day, the silence was unbearable. Questions gnawed at him. Had he imagined it? Could the pendant have been nothing more than a coincidence, a cruel trick of fate? His memory was perfect, but his certainty was fraying. The more the trail grew cold, the more the hope inside him curdled into frustration. Then at last a crack. It didn't come from Emily. It came from Margaret Delacroix. Richard's investigators dug into her life, and the shine of wealth peeled away like cheap paint. The diamond ring she claimed had been stolen, a fake. The real one pawned months ago to cover her husband's mounting debts. The grand performance at the Golden Lantern had been nothing more than a scam, an attempt to pressure the restaurant's insurers into a payout. Rage burned through Richard at the revelation. Emily's life had been shattered, her reputation smeared not because of a mistake, but because of a fraud. She had been collateral damage in a scheme that crumbled under the weight of greed. Still, the truth about Margaret gave him more than anger. It gave him a thread. His team retraced every step of that night, every witness, every overlooked detail. That was when they found him, the busboy, a college kid nervous and eager to please, who remembered the chaos with remarkable clarity. He remembered the waitress dropping her belongings, the pendant that swung into the light, and he remembered her words spoken softly to herself as she gathered her things. She said something about a shelter the boy recalled. Haven House, on West Madison. Said she'd stayed there before, if things got bad. It was the first true lead. The first time the impossible began to feel within reach again. In the glass tower, high above the city, Richard pressed his hand against the rain-streaked window, the skyline blurred and shifting below. The storm inside him stilled, replaced by a fierce, unshakable determination. The predator had found the scent again, and this time he would not lose it. Haven House sat on a quiet stretch of West Madison, its brick facade plain and unassuming, a building most people passed without a second glance. Inside, the air carried the mingled scents of soup simmering in the kitchen and the sharp bite of disinfectant. It was a world apart from the marble floors and chandeliers of the Golden Lantern, a place where survival mattered more than spectacle. Richard Hale's black sedan pulled to the curb. For once, he did not wait for his driver to open the door. He stepped out himself, the chill of the evening settling over him. He adjusted the lapel of his coat, not for vanity, but to steady hands that shook with something he hadn't felt in years, fear and hope entwined. The woman at the reception desk looked up startled to see a man like him here. His face was one she might have recognized from a magazine cover, but in this moment he seemed stripped of that armor. He leaned forward, voice rougher than usual. "I'm looking for someone. Emily Carter. They told me she might be here." The woman hesitated, the rules of privacy warring with the human compassion in her eyes. Something about the desperation in his tone tipped the scales. She nodded faintly. "Second floor, room 204. Richard whispered his thanks, then climbed the narrow staircase 2 steps at a time. His pulse thundered in his ears. Each door he passed felt like a lifetime. Each number another beat in a countdown. He had been living for 22 years. At last, he stood before 204. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap came the sound of movement fabric folding, a zipper tugged shut. He placed his hand against the frame, drawing one steadying breath, and then pushed the door open. The room was small, scarcely larger than a dormitory cell. A single metal-framed bed stood against the wall, a cracked dresser beside it. Emily Carter knelt by the bed, folding a faded sweater into a worn backpack. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, her movements mechanical, like someone who had packed and unpacked their life too many times to count. Emily. Her name fell from his lips before he could stop it. It was not a command, not even a question, just a plea. She turned, startled, her eyes widening at the sight of a tall man in an expensive coat filling the doorway. She took a half-step back, clutching the backpack to her chest as if it could shield her. "Who are you?" "How do you know my name?" Richard lifted his hands slowly, palms open as though approaching something fragile. His voice was careful, almost breaking. "I was at the restaurant the other night. I saw what happened to you. But this isn't about that. It's about your pendant." Her hand flew instinctively to her collar, gripping the silver chain beneath. Suspicion sharpened her gaze. "What about it?" "Please," he whispered. "May I see it?" For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then reluctantly, she pulled the chain over her head. The pendant swung free, glinting in the dim light, the tiny sapphire catching a spark. She held it out at arm's length, unwilling to let him close. Richard's eyes locked on the compass. His throat constricted. He spoke as if to himself. "The sapphire chip, at true north." "God, I know it." Emily frowned, her grip tightening. "How could you possibly?" His voice cracked as he whispered, "Turn it over." Her fingers trembled as she flipped the pendant in her palm. On the back, the engraving shimmered faintly, ad astra per aspera. To the stars through hardship. Beneath it, 2 initials, LH and AH. Richard's breath shuddered out of him. His knees nearly buckled under the weight of recognition. He looked at her, tears welling in eyes that had rarely known softness. "Those were our father's words," he said hoarsely. "And those are our initials. Lucius Hale. Anna Hale. I was Lucius. You were Anna." Emily stared the world tilting beneath her feet. For years, the pendant had been a cruel riddle, a relic with no answer. Now, in this small room, a stranger was speaking truths only blood could know. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her chest heaved with disbelief, with fragile joy and terror in equal measure. For the first time in 20 years, brother and sister faced one another. Not in dreams, not in faded photographs, but here breathing, crying alive. The compass had pointed them home. The city unfolded beneath them like a constellation of steel and light. Richard's private elevator rose in silence, carrying them higher and higher, until the doors slid open into a penthouse suspended above the skyline. Emily hesitated on the threshold. She had never seen such a place outside of films, a cathedral of glass and shadow, where walls became windows and the city itself seemed to kneel below. To her, the space was both breathtaking and alien, like stepping into a planet that obeyed different rules of gravity. She felt suddenly small, a sparrow swept into a cathedral built for giants. Richard guided her through the vast rooms, his usual authority softened by something gentler. "This is yours now," he murmured, his hand brushing the air rather than reaching for her, as if afraid one wrong gesture might send her fleeing. Down a quiet hallway, he opened a door. Emily stepped inside and stopped cold. It was a child's bedroom. The walls were painted a soft blue, faded but untouched. A shelf of storybooks leaned under the weight of time, their spines still cracked in places where a child's hands had lingered. A small bed sat against the wall, neatly made as if expecting its owner to return at any moment. Dust floated in the air, catching the city's glow that spilled through the curtains. "I never changed it," Richard said, his voice rough with the effort of keeping it steady. "For 22 years, I couldn't. It felt like betraying you. Betraying the hope that one day somehow you'd walk back through the door." Emily's throat closed. She reached out, running her hand across the bedspread, the fabric thin with age, but still carrying the faint echo of childhood. She had no memory of it, and yet something in her chest ached like recognition. In that room, the walls between them cracked open. Richard spoke first, his words tumbling with years of silence breaking apart. He told her about the storm, the way he had clawed at the ocean until his strength gave out, about the decades since building towers and companies with a ferocity that was nothing but grief sharpened into ambition. Emily listened and then answered with her own story, the blur of foster homes, the years of being a name on a file, a face no one kept long enough to remember. Jobs that ended before they began, friendships that dissolved when life grew too hard. Her only constant had been the pendant, a mystery she had held against her skin, like a question that had no answer. By the time she finished, the city beyond the glass seemed to stand still, as though even the skyscrapers were listening. Richard's jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist. "The people who humiliated you, who accused you of theft, who cast you aside, they will pay for it. I'll see to it personally." His voice had turned cold, the edge of the predator slipping back into place. But Emily shook her head. For the first time, she looked him in the eye, with a strength that stopped him mid-breath. "No," she said softly, "I've lived powerless all my life. If I have power now, my first act won't be vengeance." He stared at her, surprised, the fire in his chest tempered by her calm. She went on. "Prison won't change Margaret Delacroix, but service might. Let her feed the hungry at Haven House. Let her sell her glittering lies and turn them into bread for those who need it. Justice isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's mercy with teeth." Silence stretched between them. Then slowly Richard's expression shifted. Not disdain, not frustration, but something like awe. He had conquered empires, bent men to his will. But here was strength of another kind. Compassion forged in hardship, or mercy born from wounds. Without a word, he turned and crossed to the far wall of his study. He pressed his hand against a painting, and it swung open to reveal a hidden safe. From within, he withdrew a small velvet-covered box and carried it back to her. When he opened it, Emily drew in her breath. Nestled in the silk lay a heavy silver signet ring carved with the same compass rose as her pendant. "Our father had them made as a set," Richard said quietly. "The ring was mine. The pendant was yours." He lifted it carefully, holding it next to her pendant. Two pieces of silver separated for 2 decades, finally reunited. Emily's eyes blurred with tears as the compass and the ring caught the city's light together. For the first time, She felt the truth settle in her bones. She was no longer Emily Carter, a ghost drifting between shelters and dead-end jobs. She was Anna Hale. She was home. Margaret Delacroix's empire of illusions crumbled faster than anyone expected. The glossy photographs of galas and the diamond-studded hands, the expensive gowns, all revealed to be scaffolding around a hollow core. Investigators uncovered the pawnbroker's slip, the debts her husband had buried, the fake diamond she flaunted like a crown jewel. In the end, it wasn't Richard Hale's wrath that toppled her, but the unrelenting gravity of truth. Faced with exposure, she could no longer deny that Margaret was forced to make choices she once would have called beneath her. The Delacroix townhouse was sold at auction, its crystal chandeliers and silk draperies parceled off to strangers. Her jewelry cases emptied one by one, the sparkle of her diamonds exchanged for plain checks made out to Haven House. And then came the part that stung most of all. The woman who once sneered at waitresses now stood behind a soup line, ladling broth into paper bowls. Her manicured hands, once lifted only to gesture for service, now moved awkwardly clumsy, with a ladle heavy from use. The shelter air was thick with the smell of onions and bread, so different from the perfume of her former life. Emily Carter. Anna Hale, now in truth, though the name still felt foreign on her tongue, watched from a quiet corner. She did not smile. She did not gloat. There was no satisfaction in seeing another woman stripped of dignity. Instead, she stood with a calm that came not from triumph, but from choice. This, she thought, was the real test. To hold power after a lifetime of powerlessness, and to use it not as a weapon, but as a balm. Revenge hardens the heart. Mercy heals it. And mercy wielded properly was sharper than any punishment. Richard stood at her side, watching as well. His expression was unreadable, the predator's edge still lingering in his jawline. But his eyes softened when they rested on his sister. He saw in her a strength he had abandoned long ago in his climb to the top, a strength born not of conquest, but of endurance. To him, it was humbling. He had built towers of steel, but she had carried towers of silence and kept walking. He realized, as Margaret shuffled through her sentence of service, that it was not his billions nor his threats that had delivered justice. It was Anna's quiet insistence on compassion. Later, when the evening meal ended and Margaret sank onto a bench with exhaustion, Richard placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You've done something I could never have done," he said quietly. Emily shook her head. "You've done it too. You just forgot what it felt like." Her words hung in the air, soft but undeniable. And Richard knew she was right. In the shelter's dining hall, under buzzing fluorescent lights, something greater than punishment had been achieved. A woman who once mocked desperation now served it. The poor ate with fuller plates, and Emily Anna stood taller, her compass pointing her not toward vengeance, but toward a home rebuilt on grace. The city was still dark when Richard led his sister into his study. Behind the glass walls, the horizon was only beginning to blush with the first strokes of dawn. The penthouse, so often a fortress of silence, felt different now. Less like a monument to power, more like a place waiting to be filled. On the desk, Richard set down a small velvet box. Emily placed her pendant beside it. Side by side, the compass rose, and the silver ring gleamed in the dim light. Two relics of a family torn apart, now reunited on the same table after more than 2 decades. Neither spoke at first. Words felt clumsy, unnecessary. The silence between them was no longer hollow. It was full, brimming with the weight of what had been lost and miraculously found again. Emily Anastasia Hale sat back, her eyes fixed on the pendant. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of belonging. She was not a ghost drifting from shelter to shelter, not a nameless file in a foster system. She was a daughter, a sister, a piece of a story larger than her suffering. Across from her, Richard looked nothing like the ruthless billionaire who once terrified boardrooms. His shoulders seemed lighter, his eyes softer, stripped of armor. He was not the mogul or the magnate, not the man whose name filled headlines. He was simply a brother who had found his way back to hope. The city brightened outside skyscrapers, catching the first gold of morning. Emily pressed her hand to the glass, watching the light crawl across the skyline. For so long, she whispered, I thought I was no one, just a shadow. But now, her voice trailed, but Richard finished it for her. Now you're home. She turned and their eyes met. Not as strangers bound by coincidence, but as family restored by fate. The story did not close with fireworks or headlines, but with something quieter, more profound. A truth that settled deeper than any courtroom verdict or act of revenge. Sometimes justice does not arrive in punishments. Sometimes it comes in mercy. Sometimes it comes in the rediscovery of family. And sometimes, in the darkest nights of our lives, a compass, whether of silver or of the heart, can still point us home. Outside the window, the sun rose higher, painting the city in light. In that study, two lives once severed had been knit back together, not perfectly, not without scars, but enough to begin again. Life can scatter us, grief can bury us, and injustice can wound us. But even then, hope waits. A compass can still point us home. If this story moved, you share it with someone who might need hope tonight. And if you believe in second chances and the power of family bonds, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, because every week we bring you true dramas of resilience, justice, and the unbreakable thread of hope.